Hey y'all, Melissa here with you today, and today's project is back here on the wall. This is actually my wedding dress, and I'm going to be showing you how to take out a zipper and add in a corset tie back like this. So the coach and I accidentally started an anniversary tradition. One year we were in Hawaii for a milestone anniversary, and I really wanted some pictures while we were there, and I hired a local photographer to take some trash the dress pictures. Now I didn't want to actually trash my dress, I just wanted the pictures in the ocean. And I knew, because my mom made my wedding dress, that the fabric was washable. So here are some of those pictures, and it was a lot of fun, but that is also the last time I was able to get this dress zipped all the way up. On the next milestone anniversary, 5 years after that one, we did some more pictures locally here in Austin with some of the different murals. And I love the way these pictures turned out, but you can't see the back of this dress because it was safety pinned together at the top because we couldn't get it zipped. The coach, the photographer, and I were all holding the dress and trying to zip up those last couple inches, and it would not go. So we've reached 5 years again. That was 5 years ago. We've reached 5 years again, and we didn't even try this time because I knew that I was going to have an even harder time than 5 years ago getting this zipped up. So I decided it was time to go ahead and convert this to a corset back. So today I'm not only going to show you how to do that corset back, I'm going to show you how to make your own lacing panels so that you don't have to buy them. Now I will link a source to buy them, but we're also going to see how to make it yourself. Let's talk about supplies. Now you can buy these zipper replacement kits, and I will link this one that I got below. It does come in different lengths and different colors. So it'll come with these side panel pieces here and lacing and a modesty panel that goes behind it all. So I ordered white, and as you can see, since my dress has been on many adventures over the years, this doesn't actually match anymore. So to make your own, you are going to need fabric, and you're going to need some plastic boning. You could also use other types of boning if you wanted. This is flexible, it's easy to cut, and it's fairly inexpensive. So I will link some sources for that below. And remember these tails on the back of my dress? So the flowers disappeared years ago. I have no idea where they went. And the tails were just there without the flowers on them anymore. And they can't be on the back if I'm putting that corset on the back, because they used to, hang right here. And it would have covered the lacing panel, and it just wouldn't have worked very well. Actually, the way these were attached, they would have ended up like one on each side with the lacing in the middle, and I think that just would have looked strange. So I unpicked the tails that were on the back there, and this is the extra fabric that I'm going to use to make the cording and the panels for my corset modification here. And since this is some of the satin that was originally part of the dress, this is going to match perfectly. Okay, here are my pattern pieces that I have made for my side pieces and my modesty panel. For the side pieces, I measured how far down, how long I needed them to be, and I determined that I need a 10-inch length here. And then at the bottom, because my boning is 1/2 inch wide, I decided to make this 1.5 inches. That gives me enough for a boning channel on each side, plus some more room to sew the loops down one side and then still have a little bit of wiggle room. Then I added 5/8 of an inch here. This will be below the boning, and it won't have any boning in it, just to be hidden in that V where I'm going to stop the zipper. And then I added a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. Now I roughly doubled the side panel pieces for this modesty panel, and I also kind of stuck it in and made sure this is going to cover what I want it to cover. So at the top here, I'm 4.5 inches wide, and at the bottom I did 3 inches wide, and I have very little fabric to work with because I just have those 2 streamers. So what I'm going to do is the side panels here, I need to cut 4 of these total, and I'll be cutting those out, like the top part here, And then this modesty panel, I should be able to cut out once from this area. And then, you know, this leaves me room to cut out side panel pieces here. And then on the back side of the modesty panel, because I do need to cut two, I'm going to just use some cotton. The inside of my dress is actually originally lined with a cotton broadcloth, not a satin. So that made it a little easier for me to wear in the summer, because I did get married in the summer. And I'm gonna do the same thing on this modesty panel, so the side that's against my skin will be the cotton. Okay, so I'm going to be taking all of these strips that I cut, and I only left myself a 1/4 inch seam allowance on these. And then I am going to be folding them in half, right sides together, and stitching down that seam and then turning a tube, because that will make all of my cording for the loops and the lacing. So the best way I found to do these tubes is to kind of use a seam ripper or the point of a tube turner or whatever I can to like poke the end in here until I've got kind of a clean end, and then to put the other end inside. Okay. Once I have those ends together, then it's hand stitching time. And I'm basically doing a really tiny ladder stitch around the edges to stitch these two together. All right, y'all, now that I have this lacing and looping stuff done, we're going to sew the loops onto one side of the side pieces. So I'm laying this out here on my fabric cutting mat, because I'm going to use kind of the inch marks on here as guidelines. So remember, we had a 1/2 inch seam allowance and an extra 5/8 inch at the bottom. So I'm lining that up there. And then I'm going to start here, and I'm going to make a loop every 1 inch. And I want the loops to be about 1 inch deep, so that once I stitch across them at that 1/2 inch seam allowance, there's about 1/2 inch of loop sticking out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by placing my end right on an inch mark, and then I'm going to fold it like a V, like this. And I want the top of the V to be touching along the next inch mark, and the end of the V to be on the next inch mark. And then I'm going to fold it down again, and I'm going to add a clip here. I find the clips work a little better than pins on this particular fabric. This satin is actually a lot tougher to pin than you would think. And that's probably why it was so hard for me to turn it, and why I had to turn it in little sections. And I'm going to do this for 9 loops. So I've got 4 here. I'm about halfway done. Okay, this one is finishing lower down than I want it to. So I'm actually gonna get it closer to 1/2 inch, because I want that top loop to begin at the top. And I'm gonna re-space these loops. And actually I can cut this one. So I know here's where I want to start, here's where I want to end. I'm going to space the rest kind of in between a little better. And if I really wanted to get precise, I could take my Simflex gauge out, but I'm okay with eyeballing this. Okay, those look pretty even to me now. So what I want to do is I'm going to baste, and I'm going to go on the 3/8 inch mark to sew these in place. I'm not actually going to switch to a basting stitch, because these are thin and I want to make sure several stitches get tacked into each end of the loop. So I'm going to use my regular 2.5 millimeter stitch length, but I am going to be outside the seam allowance where I'm stitching here. Okay, as I was stitching there, you saw me using this tube turner to guide the fabric in place and keep it from slipping, because it does like to slide since satin is slippery. And I will link this tool below. This is good so you don't sew through your finger. And then now that I have this part of the panel sewn, we're going to go ahead and place the other side of it, right sides together, and I want to stitch around one end, across the top, and down the other. And when I do this, I want to leave that bottom the bottom 1/2 inch seam allowance open. So I'm going to place a pin right at 1/2 inch because that is where I'm going to start stitching. And now that those loops are kind of held in place, I do find it easier to pin than clip because you can pin in between the loops. And remember, when you're sewing with fabrics like this, to check, make sure your pins aren't going to leave permanent pinholes. That can be a problem when you're working with satin and silk. And I've got a whole post with more tips for sewing with satin and silk and fabrics like that. And that's linked below as well. Okay, now that I've got that sewn, we are going to clip these corners just to take the bulk out of there. And then we have to turn the whole thing right side out. Okay, and we're going to use the point turner to get those corners out at the top. There we go. So now what we need to do is we're going to top stitch, and then we're going to insert the boning and put in those channels. To top stitch, I'm going to move my needle all the way over to the furthest right position, and then top stitch as close to the edge as I can. So here is my top stitch panel, and now it is time to stick the boning in. And so what I like to do first is I like to take my non-fabric scissors and round off the end of the boning. And if you've used a different kind that is not like as easy to cut, which this isn't super easy, but you can cut it. If you've used a different kind, then this is going to be harder to do, and you might need to use something like wire snips. But so then I'm going to push the boning up here and figure out where do I need to cut it, which is going to be right here. I want to be able to stitch right below that lowest loop. So double checking. There we go. That's going to be my first piece of boning, and then I'm going to make another one that's going to go on the other side. Then I'm going to take one piece of my boning and I am going to get it as close to that edge as possible. And you can kind of feel inside where the loops are, and you want it, you know, either with all the loops on top or all the loops on bottom, your choice. But once you get it in there, I do find if you can with your fabric that it is helpful to pin vertically like this to kind of keep the boning against that edge until you stitch it. And another pin to keep it in the bottom. So then I'm going to stitch right down like this line, like where my pins are. And I'm actually going to switch to a zipper foot because I found that is an easier way to get that needle and the stitches right next to the boning without needing to measure like where it is close to the edge of the presser foot. Okay, here it is with the boning sewn into a channel. I am going to do the same thing on the other side now. If your boning is curved like this and you put one side in one way and one side the other way, they kind of help flatten each other out. All right, you'll notice I went ahead and top stitched around the bottom when I was done stitching this channel. And now that this is boned, this one is done, and I need to make the other side the same way. And then the modesty panel that's going to go behind these, I'm going to make this the same way as well. The only difference is that this time it will be easier because I won't have to deal with the loops on the modesty panel. Okay, so whether you bought a kit or you made your own loops for the back, you should have two side pieces, you should have a modesty panel, and you should have some lacing. And what we're going to do now is sew this into the dress. Okay, so I've moved the weight of the dress over, and you can see where the invisible zipper was. And what I want to do is, I'm going to want this panel to end up here, just like the invisible zipper, and I don't want this line, like you could just top stitch right here, but I don't want a line of top stitching on the front. So I'm unfolding this edge here, and I can clearly see, because it's been folded for so many years, I can see where that fold is going to be. And I want to pin so that this line of stitching is just to the inside of that fold. And I will have me stitching then on the seam allowance, and then when I fold this to the inside, it won't be visible. There won't be like visible stitching on the outside. And I'm using long pins because they can go under the boning. I'm not pinning through the actual boning. You'll notice I have not cut the zipper tape off yet either. That's because I wasn't quite sure where to stop unpicking, and as you can see, I'm going to have to unpick a little bit more to get this entirely pinned in place. Okay, I am only going to stitch to this bottom loop, so I'm not going to unpick any more zipper. So I can take this to my machine now, and I'm going to stitch right on top of the line of top stitching that is already there, and that should, like I said, be within the seam allowance on this dress. Okay, what I've decided to do with the zipper here, instead of cutting it, in case I ever want to alter this to go back to just having the zipper, I'm just going to tuck it back in to this seam allowance where it used to be, and I'm just going to tack it to the seam allowance here, and then it'll just hide out there underneath this panel. And you still can't see it on the outside, so I'm just going to leave it in there. And once again, using a blind ladder stitch to stitch this lining back on. And then once I'm in here, I'm going to whip stitch. And you can kind of see the original whip stitching that was finishing this. And as I whip stitch the rest of this piece into place, I'm going to be watching to make sure, and that's why I've got my hand on the back side, I'm going to be making sure that I'm only stitching it to the lining and not the outer fabric. You can see how I'm stitching that in place there. And this is really hard to do with the camera between my face and my hands, so I am going to be switching off the camera, doing this by hand where I can see it, and then I'll turn the camera back on. Okay, y'all, I have the two side panels in. I've stitched them to the lining, and now the only thing left is that the modesty panel needs to get stitched in. And so because this needs to also not show on the outside, I am going to just whip stitch it right along this edge here. And if you need any help with hand sewing stitches, I have linked a post below that covers all the basics that I use when I am sewing clothing. Okay, y'all, I have hand stitched the modesty panel in place, and now all that's left is lacing this. So I'm going to zip it up and grab the cording, and I like to lace from the bottom. And it's just like lacing a shoe where you'll go back and forth and back and forth. You can also definitely do this from the top and then have your bow at the bottom. Either way works. You can also sew a little hook and eye onto this corner of the modesty panel once you figure out how it fits so that it will stay right there. But usually the pressure of having it, the boning and then against someone's back will keep it in place. So there we go. That is the corset instead of the zipper on the back, and now I should be able to put this on. And check out this playlist for more tips and tricks for sewing formal garments.